every time we'd teach a ZingTrain seminar and we'd have people come from around the country or around the world and spend 2 days together training and sharing information, I found it so uplifting to realize that there are all these businesses, and most of our clients are smaller, independently owned businesses, although we've worked with some, departments of multinationals, but most of them are privately held businesses, and they're all over the world trying to make their particular area better. They're trying to make their company better. They're trying to make their communities better. And, that's not what's on the front page of the paper, but that's really gratifying.
Welcome to the 2.5, Conversations Connecting Innovators. My name is Klaus. I'm an innovation coach in Baden-Württemberg in the southwest of Germany. Innovators and creators from around the globe help each other by sharing highs and lows, their motivation and creative passions, as well as their favorite methods, tools, and ideas. The name of the podcast comes from the 2.5% innovators from Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory. Find more details, all the episodes and transcripts at the2.5.net. Enjoy the show. My guest is Maggie Bayless. She is the founder of ZingTrain with a 30-year-plus career as an entrepreneur, consultant, and educator. She is located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in the US. Welcome, Maggie. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Maggie, we are talking about 30 years of ZingTrain today also, but I think we have to start in the beginning. Where was your start in life?
I grew up in a small town in southern Ohio, Wilmington, Ohio. My father was a college professor, taught chemistry. So I actually grew up never considering that business was a possible career. And one of the things, a real milestone in my childhood was when I was 8, my dad was on sabbatical and studied for a year at the University of Heidelberg. So I spent that year in Germany, which gave me a love for that language and a love for your country. And then when I went to college, I majored in German literature. But you promised that you wouldn't require me to answer any questions in German right now, because I have lost that. Although that's one of my bucket list items, is to go back and spend a couple of weeks at the Goethe Institute again and get my German back. So
wow. Okay. Yes, I promised that we wouldn't be doing any German talking and so on. But do you have like a favorite German author or text from that time?
Oh, not from that time. I read a really interesting book in translation called Identity. It's a current book, but it was written in German, and I got the German out of the library and I was like, I think I want to really understand what's going on here. So
I think German is a tough language to learn. So there might be languages that are more difficult to learn, but so no blame. But still, thank you for sort of aspiring to coming back to Germany and travel around. Maggie, you got a BA at Oberlin College. And I've read a lot about Oberlin College. How was that as an experience in the 70s? How was Oberlin College in the 70s like?
Wow. What was it like? Well, it is, I don't know that this will make sense to non-US listeners, but I mean, I would say it was a very progressive liberal arts school. The students were fairly politically engaged, although in the 70s, less politically engaged than probably in the 60s. But I graduated from Oberlin sort of feeling like most of the, social problems had been taken care of because I wasn't dealing with them. I wasn't dealing with sexism on campus, or at least I wasn't recognizing it. And then I went to work at a bank in Chicago and was blown over by the sexism that I encountered in the workplace and realized, oh, maybe I was in a little bit of a bubble there in an academic community. I got very involved with student co-ops when I was eating and dining co-ops where the students really ran the show. And that was appealing to me. And I did graduate with a sense of sort of anti-business feeling. I just felt like corporations, big business was bad. I wouldn't say that I had a really coherent argument about that, but it was just a sense that I had. So I actually spent quite a bit of my early professional career trying to ignore the fact that I was good at business because it felt like I shouldn't be. Like I should be doing something more, giving back more or something. So, and at some point I realized that I had, as the oldest child, I had internalized both of my parents. My father, who had a career and worked full-time, and my mother, who was a full-time volunteer and was very active politically. And so I think I felt like I needed to do both of those things. And there was a point where I realized, oh, but I'm one person. I can't do them, both full-time. But I really did struggle with the idea of business as a career. And I remembered that when I was working at the bank in Chicago, my dad said to me on a phone call, well, if you like business, maybe you should think about getting an MBA and maybe the bank would pay for it. And I was actually insulted that he thought that would be a worthwhile course of study. Now, 5 years later, I ended up going to the University of Michigan and getting an MBA and no one paid for it. So it was one of many times that I didn't give my parents as much credit as I should have for understanding me better than perhaps I understood myself.
But it's also a testament for your personal development that you can see what you're good at and what you like and sort of change your views also.
Yes. I mean, there is that. I will say that, and I've heard other people say this too, other people who are sort of near the end or at the end of their professional careers, that I can look back and I can make it all look like it was an organized plan. But in fact, everything was kind of like, okay, what are we going to do today? Until I started ZingTrain, which was in 1994. So I would say from 1994 on, there has been a plan, a really well thought out vision and plan. But kind of getting to that point, it was a lot of fits and starts and trying different things. And even deciding to go back to school to get an MBA came out of the desperation that in the early 80s, the economy in the US was really not good. And I was having a hard time finding a job. And, when in doubt, go back to school. By that time, I lived in Ann Arbor, and the University of Michigan has very reputable business school. And so that was actually the only business school I applied to because I wasn't willing to move, but I thought, well, that would be an option. And then I was accepted into the program. So then I got an MBA, which made it look like I had a plan.
Yeah. Well, the plan is the things that you do while you're doing it or something. Don't remember the right definition of that.
Oh, that's life is what happens while you're planning other things or something like that.
Something like that, yes. But you said nobody was paying for it. So you were paying for your education yourself, and you also had to make money to make a living.
Now, I had to pay for my graduate school. My family paid for my undergraduate, but graduate school back then wasn't as gaspingly expensive as it is now. I mean, I graduated, I got some loans and I got some grants to go to school, but I think I graduated with $10,000 in debt. I mean, a really manageable amount.
Yep. But I understand that all these things have exploded in the US. I mean, in Germany, a higher education or education is free.
Right.
It's paid via taxes, so it's a good system, I think, for everybody. But things are different in other parts of the world. And I understand in the US, there's lots of people with student debts that leave or start their career with a lot of debt. So that was different with you. But was that around the time where you got into contact with Zingermans and with Ari and Paul?
Yeah. So I met Ari and Paul when I first moved to Ann Arbor. So I moved to Ann Arbor in 1979. I actually followed from Chicago. So I graduated from Oberlin. I moved to Chicago. I worked at a bank there. I also waited tables there before I got the job at the bank. And then I quit the job and traveled for the summer. That was one of my MOs early on. Work long enough to make enough money to travel, quit, travel, till the money ran out, then get another job.
Sounds very familiar.
I recommend that, actually. So I moved to Ann Arbor in the summer of 1979, and I got a job waiting tables. And it just so happened that the restaurant where I went to work was where Ari and Paul had met. At that point, Ari was still there. He had just been promoted to assistant kitchen manager. Paul had moved on, but they were still friends. So I got to know them there. And so when they opened Zingerman's Delicatessen in 1982, I was one of the unpaid friends and family who was there helping recover the chairs and paint the walls and do all of that. And so the deli opened in March of 82. And in September of 82, I started the MBA program at Michigan. And I worked in the deli on Saturdays while I was getting my MBA. So that was how I supported myself. And yeah, and then actually one summer while I was in the MBA program, I had an internship with Dresdner Bank in Düsseldorf. So that was fun. That kind of brought my language stuff back together.
Great.
And then I graduated in 1984. And I decided if I was ever going to try corporate America again, because the bank was First National Bank of Chicago when I was in Chicago. I mean, that was a big corporate bank. I'm pretty sure big corporate America is not for me, but if I'm ever going to do it, coming out of the MBA program, you have the entree into some of those, at least to get interviews at places. So I interviewed with some big companies. I wanted to stay in the Ann Arbor area, and I took a job with General Motors. I didn't last very long. I look back on it, and I met some wonderful people there, and there were some really smart, creative people. And it was a really frustrating system to work in. And I was involved with a team that supported some of the top executives. So the product policy group, the chairman and the president and the heads of the different car divisions that were making decisions about forward products. What are we going to carry 10 years from now? I was not. I was in some of those meetings. Let's be clear, they were not asking my opinion. I was making photocopies. But it was really interesting to be a fly on the wall in some of those meetings. And I was really shocked by the reluctance to share bad news. The executives didn't want to hear it. And so the people that reported to them were afraid to say it. And it made me realize that, wow, these people are making decisions with bad information because people are like changing the information to paint a rosier picture. But these people are also creating the culture that makes it unacceptable to bring bad news. And so that was my first real aha about a company can be really big and in some ways successful. And yet I would almost say there's decay inside or rot at the core that I think came back to bite GM at some point. I think they've recovered, but it made me realize I don't want to work in an organization where we can't talk truthfully about what's going on and address those issues with all available information. Does that make any sense?
It does. It perfectly does. And if we think about the products, the trainings that you do and that you have developed at ZingTrain, which we come back to later, it makes perfect sense, I think, to understand this experience here in that context of the later products. Yeah.
Yeah. I also think it's one of the reasons that I've been such a proponent of open book management, because I just believe that no one person or group of people understands an organization as well as kind of everybody together, because everyone is looking at things from a different perspective. And if you share with people what the goals are for the organization and, where we're trying to get to, and you get everybody going in that same direction, you're just going to get not only more engagement, but you're going to get better ideas.
Mm. If we talk about transparency in a business, in maybe also in relationships between people working, do you think this experience sort of has triggered or shaped that your view of transparency, or was that started earlier? For example, in Oberlin College, you talked about the students running individual businesses or places. Where was that root?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I think when I was at Oberlin, I know that Oberlin was formative for me, and my closest friends are friends that I made at Oberlin. They're still some of the people that I'm closest to, but I wasn't spending my time there. Maybe I should have been, but I wasn't spending my time there thinking about, oh, now I'm laying the basis and the foundation for my life. I just wasn't thinking about that.
That's not something that you do with 20 years old, right? But you just do things and experience things.
Right. And that you either like it or you don't, and then you try to do more of the stuff that you like. But I think that experience at GM really was profound for me in a couple of ways. One was just this realization that, a seemingly successful, and on many fronts, successful organization is not necessarily getting everything right. And individual people have a huge impact on the culture of a department. Because I was hired in by one manager, and I loved working for him. And he was he just was interested in input and kind of out of the box thinking. And then he got promoted and went away. And then a different manager came in who was all about just do what I tell you to do. And you don't need to understand the reason. I just want you to do it. So I had that. And that whole idea that people were making decisions with bad information, and yet it was their fault that they didn't have the good information because they didn't want to hear it, that continues to sort of blow my mind. Because I know that if it was happening there at GM, it's happened in a lot of other organizations. And in fact, I've seen that happen. And when I left GM, I went to work for a small company because I thought, big is bad. So I went to work for a small company, and I actually discovered that it's not big and small isn't the magic. It's the people. Because I went to work for a small company that had some of the same dysfunction, just on a smaller level. There were two founders, and they didn't want to hear bad news. And so it was just really interesting. And while I was going through, then I left there and I went to work for a company that developed and did instructional design for large corporate clients. And that's where I discovered my passion for training, the idea that you can design training in a way that people can learn more effectively, and there are ways to focus the training to support the business goals of an organization.
Crazy idea.
I know. I found that so exciting. And I had stayed friends with Paul and Ari. And so I kept thinking, they believe in training and they're doing training, but they don't know how to design effective training. I wanted to kind of help them And they were trying to create a different kind of business. And so while I'm having these experiences in big business and small business, but kind of dysfunctional businesses, I was like, oh, but I have these friends who are trying to create a business that takes good care of customers, but also is a place that people want to come to work. And we're really open to getting input from the people that work there. And in fact, felt that that was a critical piece of making the business successful. And so it eventually became clear that, oh, instead of looking for that kind of an organization somewhere else, is there a way to come back and work with those guys again? And it was actually my husband who, after our first son was born, and I'd been doing some freelance work, and I was not a good stay-at-home mom. That wasn't really going to work for any of us long term. And Fred, my husband, said, you are never quite as excited and animated talking about work as when you talk about some of the projects you did with Ari and Paul. Like because when I was in business school, I was helping them. I would go in and work on Saturdays, but I also did some projects. And he goes, I think you got to talk to those guys and see, is there some way you could work with them? And I was kind of like, yeah, okay. And then they published their first formal long-term vision, the vision of 2009, which they published in 1994 with the idea of creating a community of businesses. And I read that and had this sense of like, oh, wow, for this to work, they're going to need strong training systems. Maybe there's an opportunity here. So that's kind of how that all came together.
And that's the person speaking that doesn't have much business sense or sort of defied the business sense inside her. You sort of understood the opportunity right away.
Well, yeah. And I saw that opportunity, and I want to give them credit too, because they basically were offering partnership to people that had ideas that resonated with them. And I would not have started a company on my own. That just didn't appeal to me. I like working as part of a team. But what happened from working in all these different places, large companies, small companies, I realized, oh, these businesses they're not run by magicians. They're run by people who are fallible, and some of them are making as many mistakes. I can make those mistakes too. I was like, well, I might as well try it. That sense that I think a lot of us grow up with, that the world is being run by people that know more than we do. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that know more in specific technical areas or have more experience, but at the end of the day, everybody's just people.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't think I would have started a business on my own. So the idea of being able to have my own business, but be partners with Ari and Paul, but I would be able to run the day-to-day, have their support and their insight, that was really appealing. Appealing.
And I can make good mistakes too, right? So
right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is always a starting point for improvement. So that's a good thing. And what I like about what you just said is being an entrepreneur, it gives you the opportunity to sort of design the way you want to work, design the processes, find the right customers, find the right people to work with, and all of these things, right? And doing that in a community, with partners, makes much more sense. And what we have to think about, you just mentioned that, is that Zingerman's started as a deli, but is a community of businesses today with 10 or 11 businesses. Yep. And one of the first additional businesses was the bakehouse. So it sort of grew organically, right? And adding ZingTrain part to that sort of community of business is also something really organic if you value training, if you value people, the development of people.
Right. one of the things that is unique about ZingTrain is that we are not the training department for the Zingerman's community business. We are a separate company. And when ZingTrain started, the deli and the bakehouse, which were the only other Zingerman's businesses at that time, were ZingTrain's first clients. So they paid me to help them improve their training. Over time, outside companies were interested in learning how does Zingerman's do customer service. That's always been the number one topic that people have come to ZingTrain to learn. And the ZingTrain trainers, now there are 13 people at ZingTrain, we all do some internal classes, but people from all over the organization do internal classes too. It's very decentralized. ZingTrain developed most of the classes, but we've certified other people to teach them. And I think there's real value in having operational managers doing the teaching rather than just HR professionals. All the HR people teach the HR topics, but knife safety was being taught by chefs, not by an HR person, right?
Yes, I see what you mean. First of all, it sort of scales much better. Also, it develops the content of the course of the training a lot. If the pro is sort of being equipped with the tools of how to do the training, giving some insights into a training, maybe with a rough sketch of a training, and then this person can sort of, by teaching others, improve their own training also.
Absolutely. We talk about the fourth level of learning, that when you're teaching, you learn things in a whole new way. The other thing is that one of the things we talk about are systems culture gaps. The system is the way we do something. The culture is what's really happening in our organization. There's always no organization is perfect, but if those gaps get too wide, we lose credibility. One of the problems that happens when you have centralized training in an organization is that the people who are doing the training on a topic are not necessarily the people that are doing that thing. So as the culture maybe shifts, sometimes you're training on things and the people are sitting in the training going, I know we don't do it this way. But if you're one of the operational managers and you realize that the training is getting out of date, or that the culture is kind of going off the rails, there's more of an incentive for you to kind of figure out, okay, we either have to update the training to make it consistent with the improvements we've made in the field, or we need to get what we're doing in the field sort of back on track with the way we should be doing it.
Because it's also in your personal interest that things work smoothly and people are trained well. And I see what you mean. I think that's also something that people don't really understand about innovation and innovation management that I do as a consultant, as a coach, because it's not that I do all the innovation. It's I'm helping others to be better at innovation, right? And I think it's the same thing here. What you just said about, I think it's very important and it sort of rings a bell, and people maybe might not understand the importance of that. But you just said that you also worked for a company where you started to do trainings and you learned how to sort of design trainings or got a sort of a better insight into that. And I think the thing of designing a training is so important that it gets forgotten a lot also. Because the structure and the content and maybe the mission that drives you to do all this is so important, but it's just not really visible a lot. Doing a good design, which is sort of a training, is completely different than the design of a house or whatever, but it is still design, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there are a few different things that happen when it comes to training. I think a lot of organizations, and this was true of Zingerman's, I think when we started ZingTrain, an approach, like if you don't know anything about instructional design, the most common way to deal with training is to bring in an expert and have them share what they know on the topic. And I think that often falls into what I call the fire hose approach to training, which is, okay, we've got an hour, so I'm going to tell you as much as I possibly can about this topic in this hour, and we're going to go and just and I'm the expert, and so I'm just going this deep dive. Okay, maybe that can be really interesting, but effective organizational training is not the same as a degree from the University of Michigan. Effective organizational training is, what do I need to know to be effective in my job? That's what I need to learn. And so effective organizational training starts with what's expected of this trainee and by when. And one of the first things that I did when we started ZingTrain was develop this approach to training that we call bottom line training, because we realized really the only reason for a business to be doing training is to improve their bottom line results. So for Zingerman's, that's either food quality, service quality, or financial results. That's why we're in business. The deli didn't open to train staff. Training staff is important, but the deli opened to provide a great experience to customers and to employees. So this was one of the, belated glimpses of the obvious when we started ZingTrain, because I was really interested in instructional design. I thought it was interesting. Actually, Paul and Ari did too. But you know what? Most of the operational managers were not at all interested in instructional design. And so bottom line training was a way to distill good instructional design down to basically what we call the 4 training plan questions, that if you answer those questions, you will focus the training on the right things, and you don't have to understand the theory behind it. Mm-hmm. So the first one is what's expected of this trainee and by when. And the by when is important because what we expect of someone on their first day is different than we expect after a week or after a month. And then the second question is, how are we going to make that information available? And I think most people, when they think about training, they go immediately to question number 2. They think, oh, we need to do a class. We need to do a class on customer service. But if you don't answer the first question, what are you expecting of the people who are being trained? You don't know what to put in the class.
Yep.
So you have to start with those expectations. And then the third question is, how will we measure whether the expectations are being met? So there needs to be some measurement. And then question 4 is, what are the rewards for meeting the expectations and consequences for not meeting the expectations, which is not necessarily, a raise or you're fired. When rewards and consequences, when training is involved, it's very often, if you meet the expectations, then you get to move on and learn more stuff. If you haven't learned it yet, then you need more repetition or you need more supervision. People want to work independently, so that's a reward. So those 4 questions, I think, those are the heart of bottom line training. And that's a way of, it's kind of like putting the vegetables inside the sweet treat, where it's like, make it simple. So the instructional design is built in. My experience, you go to a restaurant manager and say, we need to develop some training for your department. Mm-hmm. They just want to run away. They don't have time.
No way, I don't have the time. Don't have
the time. But if you sit down and go, let's talk through these questions to me. When someone is there on their first week, what do you expect them to know or be able to do in the first week? Let's talk about that. Okay, here are those things. Okay, what's the best way for them to learn that? They can have that conversation, and out of that, you can create a good training plan.
I think it's so obvious, especially including the time frames that you mentioned. But still, too many people think that you learn something and that's it. Then you do the work and then that's it. And you never need to learn anything anymore. But actually learning or training is also not just about training something very, very specific, like cutting a piece of bread in the right way, for example, but also of transporting a company culture, about the way you like things to be done on another level, for example, how you want to have people serve the customers, for example, or work with the customers. These are things of the training also. These are important things to shape the culture.
Absolutely. Far, far too many managers and entrepreneurs just think, well, it's so obvious. People should just know that.
Yeah.
We've come to say, when you think something's really obvious,
It's not.
it's not. And for me, that's become a real flag. If I get annoyed with someone because I'm like, why did they do that? It was so obvious they should. I'm like, okay, the problem isn't them, the problem's me. There's something that I am unconsciously competent at. There's something I'm seeing that they're not seeing. It's not that they're stupid. It's not that they're mindfully ignoring something. There's something that I have internalized, and I need to figure out what that is so I can teach it to them so that they can look for this trigger.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So you sort of have to define the standard or the normal situation or whatever you would call it, the way you think as the business owner, and sort of, but also be capable of learning from others to sort of develop that standard.
Absolutely.
Over time.
Yeah. Yes. And I really have learned that at some level, nothing is too basic. Like the question of, we answer those 4 training plan questions in a document that we call a training passport. And one of the questions is, arrives to work on time and knows what on time means in their department. And you say, well, getting to work on time, well, that's clear. But actually, it's very different in different departments or different organizations. If you have people that are have direct customer contact, tellers in a bank, for example, they need to be there. Maybe they need to punch in 10 minutes before, and they need to be ready to greet customers when the door is unlocked. In an office where everyone is on salary and there's no particular time that the doors open, maybe there's more flexibility on when people come and leave. There's not a right and a wrong, I guess globally, but there is a acceptable and not acceptable usually in any given work environment. And so we want to set people up to succeed. So we want to tell them, instead of making them guess or trying to read our minds about what's the culture here or what is expected, let's just tell them and then help them meet those expectations.
And that's also avoiding these terrible situations where you think the others should have understood, but you never told them and so on. And then there's always a sense of bad feeling. And people don't really like to talk about these things at all once they have escalated, especially.
Right.
This is also something, I think training is not a one-off thing, right? And it's also not a kind of oftentimes not a class type of thing. You can do the training. You oftentimes don't have the necessity or the people to do a class. So you have to do the design for the training for an individual also. And also you have to do something that you can sort of repeat for the next person that comes along, or to have a thing on top, a next level type of thing. And what I think that means is that you have to start developing training systems in a way, right? Because you want to develop people, you want to do that regularly and all these things. And you have to develop the content also so that people can do the work by themselves, for example, or together with a trainer, maybe in a class situation, but most of the time by themselves, for example. Please give us some background to your way of thinking of these training systems, of these creating recipes for training.
So I would say we do classes within the Zingerman's community of businesses. Probably 85% of the training we do is on shift. It's like one-on-one. You're working with somebody and you're showing them how to do a task, or you're coaching them through a task. So we do teach 5 steps to effective on-shift training: prepare, tell, show, do, review. And we have a class for trainers. But also, I think a key element here is standard operating procedures, SOPs, documenting SOPs for how to do a particular task. And this often gets missed because, people say, I don't have time to write it down. But that's that catch-22, right? If you're teaching the same thing to employee 1 and then employee 2 that comes through and everything, and each time you're kind of shooting from the hip, or maybe you're really consistent, but then you get promoted and then somebody else is doing the training and they're going to do it a slightly different way. The only way to guarantee consistency is to have some kind of documentation that you refer back to. And so while I am not a believer in the manual that has every step, because the manual is never up to date, it's never finished. But if there are certain processes that need to be done a certain way to reach the quality standard or the time standard that we're expecting.
And that are proven also.
Right. So those need to be documented and they need to be kept up to date and improved as improvements are made. So I think Zingerman's mail order is probably the business that certainly has taken the lead on that. I'm not going to say that they are currently doing that better than everybody else, but they were doing it first. And partly that's because they're almost two different businesses during the holiday season and at the rest of the year. But they do 50% of their business in the 6 weeks around Christmas. They bring on several hundred seasonal workers. And they need to bring them up to speed in a really quick time frame. So they put a real focus on documenting standard operating procedures and making them available for people to both learn from and then refer to, a new, like people could shift and do different jobs because there were SOPs that they could follow.
And you would simply read the manual and then understand what is expected or how it's done and all these things. And if there was an update, then because you learned from the experience, you would update the manual very quickly because it's a small thing.
Right. They have an SOP for updating an SOP.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Right. So there's a process you need to follow, but they have that. And they encourage people to do experiments. Like if they think something might work better, they encourage people to experiment with that. And if they can prove that this new way of doing it comes up with a better result, then the SOP would get updated.
And sometimes it's something small, like the update of a PDF. Maybe you would use a video to show something very quickly. There's so many easy ways to do these things if you have, let's say, the tools at hand, if you also have trained the people to do these things, that it's an expectation to learn and update. And also sometimes you have to sort of retrain people or move people to another level because they have new jobs or new roles. So you sort of have to interconnect these different SOPs with each other.
I mentioned passports. There's a basic orientation passport that anyone coming into any Zingerman's business needs to complete in the first 90 days. That there's what we would call ZCOB is our ZCOB. It's Zingerman's Community of Businesses, and we pronounce it ZCOB. So there are ZCOB-wide requirements, and then there are business requirements, and then there might be department requirements. So there's an orientation passport, but when someone gets a new position, then they would get a passport that has the expectations for that position. Like, here are the things that you need to demonstrate that you are trained in this area. But one of the really important things is the passport, because things are laid out, prioritized, we don't expect you to learn everything all at once. And there is this understanding that in a new position, you're going to need to learn again. And no one can learn everything all at once. So we try and prioritize, here's what to focus on first. It's not like you might not do those other things, but success in your first week in this new position will be these things.
It means X, for example.
Right. Yeah.
That brings transparency to all of these positions, I think.
Yes. There are a variety of ways you can work on this. A ZingTrain client that I've been working with in California is working on documenting what are the prerequisites for promotion in a particular position so that people know, okay, instead of just saying, you should consider me the next time that opens up, they're saying, okay, when that supervisory position opens up, here are the basic qualifications we're going to expect everyone who's applying for that to have. So you can start working on those now.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that position open right now, but you will be in a better position to apply, or your application will be stronger if you've already worked on these prerequisites. So I think the more we can be transparent about what it takes to move up in an organization, the better.
I see what you mean. It is also one of these things that sort of levels or changes, takes out the inequalities that are sometimes there in a workplace or in a society, because you can sort of prove that you are ready for that position, for example.
Yeah.
Now, ZingTrain is big on vision.
Yeah.
But that also took time to develop. How did that vision thing start at ZingTrain?
That vision thing. The vision thing started before ZingTrain. So when the deli was about 10 years old, Ari and Paul would describe it as had kind of hit organizational midlife, like they had achieved what they kind of started out to do. They were still in business, but like, what's next? And they'd always thought they only wanted one store, but they also wanted to grow in order to have opportunity for the people that worked there. As you mentioned, the bakehouse had opened. So deli opened in 82, the bakehouse opened in 92. So Ari and Paul were trying to decide, how can we grow and have opportunity, but also continue improving the quality of our food and stay unique, because that was an important thing for them. And they worked with a man named Stash Kazmersky. He helped them go through the visioning process, and they wrote this vision for Zingerman's 2009, where they said, by the year 2009, we want to have a community of businesses. So that was the first formal written vision. And that's the vision that I read and said, oh, they want to have these different businesses. Maybe one of them could be a training company. So I wrote a vision for a training company. Ari and Paul bought into it, and we were off to the races. We started ZingTrain in 94. At that point, we saw the value of vision, but we tended to think of it as just long-term organizational vision. In the year 2000, ZingTrain had grown enough that we were starting to get busy. I had an assistant, but I was really the only trainer. I had small kids. I was at a point that I think a lot of entrepreneurs get to where it's like, be careful what you wish for. And I was like, why did I do this? Maybe I'll just quit. I could just quit. I remember having this feeling like, oh, I could just quit. My assistant could get a job somewhere else in Z-Cab. It's just me. I could just quit. And I spent a day like just feeling free. And then I realized, oh, I will just recreate this for myself somewhere else. So I'm never going to have a better opportunity to create the work environment that I want than I do here. I need to figure this out, and I need to get over this hump of tension between young, growing family, business that wants to grow. And at that point, the bakehouse Frank Carollo was the founding partner at the bakehouse, and he had just brought in a co-managing partner, Amy Emberling, who had worked there as a baker maybe a couple years before. And then she had left and gone to business school. Anyway, I had this idea of maybe I could have a co-managing partner. So I talked to Ari and Paul about that, and they said, yeah, that sounds good. You ought to talk to this guy, Stash. And I had met Stash. We actually sat down and talked. And at that point, he was working as an independent consultant. He was 10 years older than me. His kids were older. He was like, travel? Oh, I'd love to travel more. Whereas I was kind of feeling like, oh, I don't want to be on the road all the time. I've got these little kids at home. So we each sat down and wrote 10-year visions for ZingTrain separately. And then we shared them, and we found that there were more similarities than differences. So we're like, okay, well, let's try this. And he became my co-managing partner from 2000 till 2013 when he retired. Working with Stash, we realized that visioning could be used for anything, for a project, for a shift. We started actively teaching a personal visioning class to ZingTrain staff, and we created a vision seminar. And that's when we started actively teaching it, and it became really embedded in both the ZingTrain and Zingerman's culture, and became something that we were really known for.
We will provide links in the show notes so people can understand the nature of visioning much better, because sometimes people in the business world talk about a vision, which is a really grand thing that is very, what's the right word? That is just abstract and so on. And it's just for big things, right? But we are talking about vision in a very imagery way that can be used for everything,
right?
Small or large.
Yeah, we define vision as what success looks like at a particular point in the future. If I'm going on a vacation in 2 weeks, I might write a vision for how I'm feeling when I get home, what's going on, and what did I experience, by which I know that that vacation was a success. And so we do long-term visions for businesses, but we do personal visions. I mean, I've had a 10-year vision for a long time, and I've then updated it and done new ones. And I just find it's a skill, writing a vision, but it's one that anyone can learn. It takes practice. You get better at it. Some people, it comes more easily to some people than others. It did not come particularly easily to me. I'm a kind of a bullet point list person, and my first visions looked a little more like a to-do list than a description. So we say what success looks like at a particular point in the future, described with enough specificity of detail that we'll know when we've arrived. So you are like building this visual image that you can explain to someone else what success looks like, or you can agree together on what success looks like.
Yeah, because you create sort of an image in easy words that everybody can understand and that everybody can talk about. Do you recall the content of your first vision for ZingTrain?
Well, some elements of it. I know that it included working with the deli and the bakehouse to improve their training. It probably had something about lowering turnover, because we were actually losing new hires. Like, they would leave within the first 3 months because they were feeling frustrated that they weren't learning as much as they needed. That's when we realized, that's because we haven't defined what does success look like when you're only here for, in your first week or your first month, what does success look like? People were gauging themselves against people who'd been in that position for 5 or 10 years. At that point, when ZingTrain started, Ari and Paul were still actively involved in the day-to-day of the business. And so, people were expecting themselves to have the same level of knowledge that Ari and Paul did, because we hadn't defined what does it look like when you're here a shorter period of time. So there was something around success working with those two businesses. And then at Zingerman's, partners make decisions by consensus. So Ari, Paul, and I were the 3 partners in ZingTrain. So I shared my draft vision with them, and then they gave me input. I remember they each wanted to add something that I was not particularly comfortable with, but we had to all come to agreement. So I ended up, Ari wanted that, I think we were doing a 5-year vision at that point. He wanted that I was writing a column on training in some national publication. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know anything. He goes, it's 5 years from now, And so I was like, okay. I ended up writing the staff training column for Gourmet Retailer magazine for 14 years. And I got to tell you that when that opportunity came up, I would have blown it off, except it was in the vision. So I was like, oh, right, I need to do this. So that was Ari's contribution. And Paul's was that I needed to have more focus on working with outside organizations, not just, and this was, he said, ZingTrain, we don't want ZingTrain to just be the training department for Zingerman's. We want this as a way to generate connections and revenue from outside the organization. And so he wanted more of a focus on that than I had written originally in the vision. So I know that when we updated the vision, I know those were both aspects of that.
And they were very helpful aspects. So they sort of formed the core also of your business for the first years.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And to me, that also reinforced my belief that working with partners was the right thing for me, because they both pushed me beyond my comfort zone, but they also were there to support me. And ZingTrain wouldn't have happened without me, but ZingTrain also wouldn't be the organization it is without that input from Ari and Paul, and then later from Stash.
Finding the right partners is really, 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 really tough. It needs a lot of work also once you found somebody, but you have to build trust. You have to have the trust in the other person that this other person isn't screwing you over or just meaning the best for you also. Maybe you don't feel it right now, but you have to trust that it is like that. So you're all very lucky in that sense, I think, because it's just not given that you find the right partners.
Right. And not every Zingerman's partner has worked out. There have been partners in some of the businesses who have left for a variety of different reasons, some under happier circumstances than others. But having a shared vision really makes a difference. And I remember early on, so before Ari and Paul would have used the term vision, before they wrote that 2009 vision, remember when I was saying I was working for all these different companies and I was like, why can't they be more like Zingerman's? And so I remember talking to Ari about, I don't know, he was on vacation and he came back from vacation and Paul had done something that Ari wasn't happy with. That's not how he would have done something. And I said, well, doesn't that bother you? And he goes, no, I know we want the same thing. We have the same goals. This is a tactical thing. And I just totally trust that we ultimately have we want to end up at the same place. So the way he's choosing to get there and the way I would choose to get there are slightly different, but I trust that we want to end up in the same place. So I'm okay with disagreeing on tactics at some point. And I remember that conversation. That was before they'd written a vision. So they, I think, were already predisposed to believe in the visioning process because they kind of intuitively were doing it already. And they had just decided to trust each other. Stash used to say, trust is not earned, trust is given. We make a choice whether we're going to choose whether we're going to trust someone or not. And that's always really struck with me because so many people focus on you have to earn my trust. And Stash said, I make a choice. I'm going to choose to trust you until you prove otherwise. Assume positive intent. Mm-hmm. People may not always do the right thing, but it's so much more fun to work with them when we assume that they will.
I never thought of it that way, but it completely makes sense. And you do that as long as you're proven the other way, as you're proven wrong, for example. Yeah.
Right. I know that there would be plenty of business people out there who would say, you're setting yourself up to be screwed. And yeah, maybe. But Ari and Paul really have an incredibly, I don't think they're taken advantage of, but they're just have a very open, they choose to trust. Mm. And that is a real foundation of our organizational culture.
And it doesn't mean that you're stupid or that you're acting stupid. You still talk about the basics or the things that are important to you, and you sort of make a contract in a way and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and you set goals and you measure and you need to make improvements and all of that. But there is a mindset of assuming that people want to do a good job and people are, if they know what's expected, will try and meet those expectations rather than assuming that everybody else is out to screw you. Mm-hmm. That defensive posture that's so just exhausting to work in that.
We just have to push against such a barrier. Yeah, it's not a good place long term, at least to be.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Talking about experiences, you have created so many tools, recipes, systems around training for training. How do you define today, in a few words, the ZingTrain experience? What is the ZingTrain experience in a few words?
The ZingTrain experience in a few words. Clear expectations. The clearly documented expectations. I think success in business, maybe in life, comes down to being clear about what the expectations are. And when things are documented, you can share them. So it's really a shared vision of success, which is what expectations are at some level, a vision of what success looks like. So I just keep coming back to that. If you know where you want to end up and you share that with other people, then the chances of getting there are better. And what ZingTrain does and has done through the years is share what has worked within the Zingerman's community of businesses and also what hasn't. What have we tried and what hasn't worked? And what are we currently working on that we think we need to improve? Because we have just found that when we share with other organizations, then they reciprocate and they share back. So we've never tried to be, of course, there's some stuff that's when Ari writes books, they're copyrighted, but
Sure.
we don't, go crazy about, we like it when people use some of our tools and adapt them into their organization. There's just an opportunity to learn from each other, and you'll have to edit that down into a few words. I can't do a few words.
No, that was a sort of a trick question because I don't think that you can use a few words to describe all that. And
Right.
Because you have created so many things and supporting ways to do the training, for example, to structure the training. It's a mixture of, let's recap the 4 questions, a training passport, right? You
Right.
do online training, you do class training, you do all sorts of things that sort of bring people together and develop them, give them knowledge, but also expectations, transparency about what they're getting also, and where they will be after the training and after that, once they use the training on the job. And I think that's something that you can't really describe in one word or in a few words, especially if you include all that great design stuff that you have with the comic images and the colors and so on.
Mm.
That is very, very special, I think, for the Zingerman community of businesses.
There's nothing more gratifying to me than hearing from a ZingTrain client who came to a seminar a while ago and has gone back and implemented something and maybe tweaked it and changed it so that it's really consistent with their culture, but then is letting us know what worked and what they're excited about, and maybe suggesting some things that things that they did differently that they think, we might be interested in knowing about. That's really gratifying to me. And I will say that the news can be pretty depressing. And 30 years of ZingTrain, when I've felt lowest about sort of what was happening in the world at large and what I would read on the front page of the newspaper, every time we'd teach a ZingTrain seminar and we'd have people come from around the country or around the world and spend 2 days together training and sharing information, I found it so uplifting to realize that there are all these businesses, and most of our clients are smaller, independently owned businesses, although we've worked with some, departments of multinationals, but most of them are privately held businesses, and they're all over the world trying to make their particular area better. They're trying to make their company better. They're trying to make their communities better. And, that's not what's on the front page of the paper, but that's really gratifying. And it never occurred to me when we started ZingTrain that, if we were willing to share what worked for us, other people would share back.
Mm.
Now it's like, well, of course they will. But I didn't go into it thinking that. But that's been the fact that they do has been incredibly satisfying and gratifying.
And you do something with that also with the symposium, where people come together and share and learn and celebrate. It's a great format.
Yeah. And we're working on creating a virtual community where there will have an ongoing, virtual space where people can continue to connect after they're at an in-person event. So I'm excited about that. More to come.
Very, very cool. Also, I suppose a lot of these businesses you work with are in the food business, and not exclusively, right?
Yeah.
But that's a great place to be also, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, food, we get a lot of good food working with our clients. Yeah. Yeah. But and when ZingTrain started, almost all of our clients were in the specialty food industry, because that's where the Zingerman's name was known. Now, in any given training we do, usually about half are in the food business and half are in everything else that possible. Yeah.
What I think also shows a lot of that ZingTrain experience is the products that you offer at ZingTrain. I understand that it's a little different, say, in the training sector or training industry than in the consulting industry, because many times in the consulting industry, we don't have the products, right? We are talking about consulting, but what do we do in that consulting scheme or thing?
Right.
And you do sort of a mix of training and consulting in these products. You have a fixed set, which evolves, I understand, but it's a proven sort of a combination of things with a few hero products. I'm talking about from a product management perspective right now. And I think that's a very, very cool thing, because you can create or design the trainings and the consulting. You can sort of improve that over time, and you can sort of learn from everybody that is participating in, for example, the customer service training or the leadership development seminars or your bottom line training.
Right.
You have the material, the input ready, and you can improve on it basically from time to time from you do the training.
Absolutely. And we have learned that certain elements of different trainings work better for certain types of companies. So there is that sort of thing. We work with we work with a lot of libraries, for example. So we have learned what pieces of our approach to customer service work particularly well with libraries. Yeah. But ongoing learning and continuous improvement is the name of the game. And one of the things I always say is training is never done. If I have one piece of advice for businesses about training, is they tend to think that, okay, we got to develop this training. Okay, it's my project for this year, and then I'm going to do it, and then it's going to be done. Your business is going to continue to evolve. The training needs to continue to evolve. The only reason to have the training is to make the business better. So the training needs to reflect what the business needs. The business is going to change. So embrace the fact that the training will change, and that's a good thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You can't imagine how often I preach stuff like that, especially in that context of improving innovation at companies. Training is one of these things that is so crucial for the development of the company, of products, of the culture. But people oftentimes just ignore it. But do you think it's a good training? What makes a good training?
What makes a good training? Where the trainees get the information they need to know to be successful. And you've defined what that is, and there's a way for them to demonstrate that they've met your expectations.
And how about a good trainer? Do you have to be like a Star Wars Yoda-like figure that knows all but talks in a secretive way?
No, I don't think so. I think an effective trainer is someone who is more focused on the trainee learning than on how they come across as a trainer. And who is also focused on what does the trainee need to learn, not what do I want to teach? Because that can be two different things. Here's another Ari example. So as I said, when ZingTrain started, Ari was still working in the deli, and he worked behind what we call the retail line. So the case that has the meats and cheeses and all of that. He was waiting on customers, but he was also training people. Well, Ari, knew all of the products, and he knew all of the producers, and he'd been to visit them, and
he was friends with them.
Yes, absolutely. And so he not only knew Mrs. Appleby, who made the Mrs. Applebee's cheddar, but he knew the names of the cows and that sort of thing. So that's all like interesting. But as I said to him, but on their first day behind the cheese counter, the new employee needs to know, A, we carry Cheshire cheese. Here's where you find it. Here's how you cut it. Here's how you weigh it and wrap it. They don't need to know about the cows.
Yeah.
And in fact, too much information, then they're overwhelmed. And he realized that by sharing what got him most excited, he was missing what that new employee really needed to know.
Mm-hmm. And creating anxiety, possibly.
Right. And probably they were thrilled to be working with Ari, the founder, and they're trying to remember all that stuff. But I think when you're a new employee in any business, but certainly ours, it's like you're standing under a waterfall of information and you're trying desperately, like, what do I hold on to here? And if we're going to be effective trainers, we need to say, okay, Klaus, there's lots of information here, but success today means you know how to use the scale and you know how to cut these wheels of cheese. There's going to be a lot of other stuff too, but today, that's what success looks like.
We have talked about very briefly about good training, about a good trainer. What makes a good training business?
I think it's the same thing that makes any good business, that you're meeting your bottom lines, which for us are your service quality goals, your product quality goals, and you're financially stable. I don't think there's an absolute size or profit level I think it depends on what do you want as a business. But if you're meeting your financial targets and your customer service satisfaction targets, then, you're delivering products and services that your clients want. And if your staff enjoy doing the work, I think that's true of any business. You're probably familiar with the book Small Giants. Do you know the Small Giants book, Bo Burlingham? We were one of the companies featured there. And I would say that the message of Small Giants is not every business's vision is to grow as big as they can, as fast as they can. And so I do always come back to a successful business is one that is making progress towards that business's vision of success.
I think with ZingTrain, you have a lot of competitive advantages over a lot of other training businesses. And I don't want to diminish the training side and the trainer side of ZingTrain. But I think you are very, very, very lucky to have like bakehouse goods and sandwiches in the breaks and whatever as part of your training offering, right?
Absolutely. And when I started ZingTrain, I had friends who said, well, wait a minute. Why Ari and Paul, they own a much bigger percentage of ZingTrain than I did when we started. Why would you have partners that own more than you do? I go, well, I'm still running the day-to-day. And there is leverage that being Zingerman's training has that Maggie's training would not have had. And not just because of the name recognition, but because what we teach at ZingTrain is what has worked in the Zingerman's businesses. That's our proof of concept, basically. We don't teach to the outside things that we're not doing within the community of businesses.
Yes. Plus you have the sandwiches.
And we have this good food. That's definitely true.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that it's much more, but I think that's just one of these really, really, really super special competitive advantages that you have.
You're right. It is.
Maggie, I found a quote about you. She's a super dedicated learning professional and always enthusiastic and encouraging in her approach. Thanks for being a terrific model for all of us, Maggie. That's high praise. What sort of model do you think yourself are you?
That is high praise. That's very nice. I think I am a good model of someone who, as I said, never thought I would be an entrepreneur, never thought I would start a company, actually didn't know that instructional design was a thing at some point. I've told many people I have built a whole career in a field that when I was in school, I didn't even know existed. So the idea that at 18, people should know what they want to do for the rest of their lives is crazy. And I also hope that I can be a role model for women who want to start businesses, run businesses, have really active, satisfying careers, and have a family. I get asked a lot by college students here, wow, you started a business and you raised kids and you had it all. And how did you do that? I said, I don't know that I had it all at any given time. It felt out of control. I can look back and it worked out, but it's a lot. But it's just how do you made some trade-offs in terms of how quickly ZingTrain grew and how much money I've needed to make in order to have more time to be with my family when my kids were little. That was a trade-off I was really comfortable with. And I had the luxury of being able to do that because I had a husband who had a corporate job and we had health insurance through him. That makes a huge difference. There are other people who would have grown ZingTrain really differently. It could have been a lot, and it could be a much bigger company than it is, but having a really big company and managing a whole bunch of people wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was to do the training and to work with a really functional, good team. I got that.
Did you get to form the company that you wanted to work for?
That's exactly what I did. If that's what you can do as an entrepreneur. I mean, it doesn't always work out, but that's the carrot, is getting to create the organization that you want to be part of. And I think anyone can do that. I mean, and I hope that anyone in Zingerman's, whether they're a partner or not, feels they can contribute to making it the organization that they want to work in. But certainly as a partner or a founder of a company, you have that opportunity.
Maggie, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Oh, so it has been really fun. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you for listening to the 2.5 Conversations Connecting Innovators. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. A transcript of this episode and additional information is also available. The link is in the show notes. My name is Klaus. I'm an innovation coach in Baden-Württemberg in the southwest of Germany. This is the 2.5.